Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on the changing dynamics of Ireland, a review of the preliminary results released from Census 2022. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes, and just giving people time to log in. Thank you very much for turning up. Bear with me, and we will start in a minute or two. Thank you. And we will start again in just a minute. So there's still a few people arriving, and then we'll kick off shortly. Okay, we might just want to welcome everybody. Thank you very much for turning up at our webinar today. I will just a piece of housekeeping. If you do have questions, there is a questions tab on the right-hand side of the screen. If you have a question, you can ask it there. We will do our best to get to those today. If that's not possible for any reason, we will follow up directly over email. So that's the questions tab there over at the bottom of your screen. So what we're talking about today is a review of the initial results that were published last week by the CSO from Census 2022, which took place last year. Just to introduce our speakers today, my name is Richard Cantwell. I'm the principal consultant with Gamma. So I work at the fusion of analysis, cartography, and client needs. And I'm ably supported today by our lead consultant, Charlotte Cuff, who develops a lot of our models and data science and statistics. So both of us have been digging through the census data that was released last week and picking out key trends that may be of interest to the audience. For those of you who might not know who Gamma are, we're not exactly a startup. I think we're 30 years in business this year. So we've worked with a very wide range of organizations, retail, telecoms, insurance, finance, government, both central and local, and so on. You can see some of the names there. But we also work in
Hello, so we seem to have had a small connection issue there with Richard, so I'll just take over. If you bear with me for a moment, I will get the presentation up. Are you back with us, Richard?
I think I am. Apologies again. We have, as always with these things, there can be some technology issues, which is, of course, amusing considering that we work for a technology company. But what I'm going to do is, yeah, sorry, apologies about that, but these things happen. And actually, this is something that we lead into later on in the talk. Because a lot of people are working from home, and that's something that the census has actually picked up on. So yeah, so you might just mute there, Charlotte. I think you might have some audio issues there too. Well, thanks. Okay. So yeah, apologies, but yeah, so we've been working with census data since the 1990s. So we've seen huge changes in time. And what we're going to talk about today is the headline figures that came out from the census, and then looking at the typical Irish households, the trends and patterns in those areas of market growth, and particularly, I suppose, in this, we pulled out some of the work from home and how that's changing the market. And again, if you have questions, please do drop them into the question tab there. So what we've seen so far is just the summary results. This is only a small subset of all of the statistics that were gathered during the census. A lot of the data is just one figure for the whole country for a particular variable. There are some spatial breakdowns, but it's only at county level. So it's not really aimed at people who are doing very fine-grained analysis at the local level, which of course is something that we in Gamma specialize in. So we're looking towards the later part of the year when more detailed data comes out. Initial ED level data, ED is an electoral division, there are about 1,000 people or so in those. We're going to get some initial data from that at the end of June. On population distribution, housing, housing will come out in the end of July, household and family at the end of August. And for us, the big one is going to be in Gamma, and for a lot of our clients is going to be the small area population statistics release towards the end of September. The small area data typically cover 100 households. But following on from that, there's also going to be what we call the POWS car, which is the place of work, school, college, census of anonymized records. But this is really used for building up things like daytime populations, commute patterns, and so on. And that will be out in the middle of October. So we should have the full set of results by October, but there will be additional profiles issued by the CSO right the way through to the end of the year. And as such, this is the first in a series of webinars that we will be doing. We may not do one for every single profile that is released, but we will be conducting an additional series. And if there are particular topics that you're interested in, again, let us know and we can put something together. In terms of the headline figures, the total population is now 5.15 million. It's an increase of 8.1 over 2016. That's actually the highest the population in Ireland has been since the 1840s. It's up 1.2 million in the last 20 years. But even so, the population is still below what it was in the 1840s. Ireland is the only country on the globe that has a population lower today than it did in 1840. The growth rate from 2016 to 2022 is pretty similar to what we were seeing during the Celtic Tiger years from 2002 up to 2011. There was a drop between 2011 and 2016 where the growth rate halved, but it has been steadily growing since the 1990s. There was a very small drop in population between 86 and 91, but more or less the population had been growing steadily since that time. Of the increase of 387,000 people, the natural increase, which is the difference between births and deaths, represented about 43% of that. So the average yearly national increase is 28,000 people. And that's births minus deaths. And then there's net inward migration, which is 57% of the increase or around about 36,000 net inward migration. That's the number of people arriving, less the number of people immigrating. And net inward migration at 57% of the input is a bit of a change from the last census, or the previous census rather. Between 2011 and 2016, net inward migration was negative, so more people immigrated than immigrated. And this was also true in the 1980s. And we should note that this doesn't include approximately 75,000 Ukrainian refugees. There were 11 or nearly 12,000 Ukrainian citizens in Ireland at the time of the census, but we would expect that figure to be significantly higher now. It could be 90,000 plus. So that was not captured by the census. There are other methods and other data sets from the CSO which can be used to track that. So we looked at where the new people went, so to speak. Every county in Ireland saw an increase in population, which I suppose was different from the 2016 census, where a couple of counties in the northwest, Donegal, Leitrim, saw small falls in population, but this time every single population grew. The highest proportional increase was in Longford, which saw its population rise by 14%. But Meath, Fingal, and Kildare also had proportional increases of above 10%. But there's a swathe of lower growth counties running from the northwest down to the southeast, so Sligo, Roscommon, Offaly, Carlow, Kilkenny, and so on. They're seeing lower proportions. So what we're looking at in the map here is, of every 100 people that was added to the population, where did they go? Well, 29 out of 100, 29% of them were in Dublin County. Dublin City Council's area, Fingal, South Dublin, Dunleary, right down, and another 11% in Cork City and County. And so the big kind of high growth counties were the 4 Dublin local authorities plus Meath and Kildare, and also in Cork City and County. And they would basically taken up more than half, 54% of the increase between Dublin, Cork, Meath, and Kildare. Looking at the classic population pyramids, we've graphed the 2016 and 2022 census on these, with the 2022 figures on top in the darker color. And you can see patterns jumping out straight away there. There is a big increases in the older populations above 40. There are fewer under 10s. The average age is 38.8. Which is increasing steadily. Just 20 years ago, that was 35.1. And there's 133,000 more people aged 66 plus since 2016. There's also been a drop in the people in the 25 to 39 age group. The biggest increase has been in people aged over 70. And even the over 85s is up by a quarter in just 6 years. So some big changes in terms of the population structure there. And these kind of peaks here in the kind of the 40s and in the teens are due to high birth rates in the 1980s and around in the 2010s, early 2010s. So looking at the median age, and not the mean, but the median age, we can see so in terms of the patterns on the map there, it tends to be younger in the east of the country, older in the rural west. The single largest age group of people, by the way, in the census was people who are aged 41. There are more people aged 41 at the time of the census than any other age. And the largest growth in average age was in Kildare, which went up by 2 years. And there's 4,500 fewer people aged under 1 year. So less babies, in 2022 than there were in 2016. At this point, I might hand over to Charlotte, who's going to talk a little bit about the households and tenure. So Charlotte, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Richard. Can everybody hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, we're now going to look at what the typical household looks like in this new 2022 census. So the number of households has increased, roughly in line with how much the population has increased. It's up 8.2% compared to 2016. Of the households, the proportion that are now a married couple with children is a little bit down. It was 48% in 2011, 46% in 2016, and it's dropped another 2 percentage points to 44%. Occupancy is quite interesting. So owner-occupied is lower than it was as a percentage compared to 2011. But there's two different ways of being owner-occupied recorded in the census, with or without a mortgage. So without a mortgage means that it's paid off and owned free and clear. So within that, owner-occupied with a mortgage decreased in both the total number and as a percentage, whereas those owned outright increased by almost 68,000. So this is partly an artifact of an aging population, that more people are reaching the end of their mortgage term, but it's also an indication that people are in fact paying off their mortgages at a slightly faster rate than new people are signing up for new mortgages. So that is an interesting trend. There are an additional 21,000 privately rented households, which only added 4,300 between 2011 and 2016. The average household has 2.7 people in it, but there is there's a continuing reduction in that. It was 3.2 people in 1996. In Meath and in Fingal, you've got the highest average number of people per household and the lowest in Dublin City. Now, just focusing in on those newly mortgage-free households, the households who have been added to the set who are not paying a mortgage, there's just under 68,000 of them, of which almost 14,000 are in County Dublin and 8,000 are in Cork. Fingal has a young population on average, but it also has significant pockets of older population who have paid off their mortgage. 12% of them are in Cork City or Cork County, and 1 in 5 of those newly unburdened by a mortgage households is in County Dublin. So that is nearly a third of the newly mortgage-free households are in just 2 counties, Cork and Dublin. And here we have a look at the house typology. So that is what type of a structure is the household in. In previous census tracts, a proportion of people didn't answer this question, but we've now got 0 in them not stated, which suggests that there might have been possibly a change in the way that these typologies were defined, but certainly a big effort to classify every household. We've seen an increase in the number of apartments. That's now standing at 13% of our permanent private households. That is still significantly below the European average of 46%. Ireland is still a very housey country with 2/3 in a detached or a semi-detached house. Bedsits are vanishing. They dropped from 5,500 in 2011 down to just over 3,000 in 2016 and down to just 1,600 in 2022. Now, at the same time, there has been an increase in flat or apartment in a converted house or commercial building. So you'd wonder, maybe some of those bedsits have actually just been rebranded into studio apartments. But at any rate, in the official figures, bedsits are on the decline. Next slide. So the average number of bedrooms per household, this is a new thing that was asked for the first time in the 2022 census. Previously, they have only spoken about number of rooms. So this is a new variable. And of course, it's interesting because that's a factor in the amount of space that people have and the level of overcrowding that might be experienced. The national average is 2.88 bedrooms per house. So our typical household at this stage is owner-occupied, detached or semi-detached, 3-bedroom. That's your typical Irish dwelling now. The number of bedrooms, of course, varies around the country, as you would probably expect. So it's the lowest in Dublin City, where we tend to have smaller dwellings overall. Of those sort of urban areas, Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown is the only one that is above the national average with 2.94 bedrooms. We also have some new detail on the use of renewable energy. And again, this is a new question that was asked for the first time in 2022. So there's 35,000 homes with solar-powered electricity, 71,000 with a heat pump, and 1.2 million homes have no renewables at all powering them. Another new question that was asked for the first time in 2022 related to fire alarms. The majority of homes have 2 fire alarms, but there's an exception for that, and there's a strong trend by the year that the house was built. So in homes that were built since 2011, they typically have at least 3 fire alarms, and of homes that were built since 2016, 70% of those have 4 fire alarms. So that is rather suggestive that perhaps the householder just accepts the fire alarms, that however many of them that are there when they move in, you say, well, that's probably enough fire alarms, that's probably fine, rather than increasing the number to line up with the current building recommendations. So I think that's an interesting insight into our behaviour. There are also 565 properties with 10 or more bedrooms, so they're obviously pretty big houses. Now, another thing that we looked at is the distribution of people's primary occupation or their primary economic status. So there's been a big increase in the number of retired people. It's up to 20.6% compared to 2016, and that somewhat aligns with what we've seen of there being an increase in our overall age profile and also an increasing number of people who have paid off their mortgages. The number of people unable to work due to illness or disability has also jumped by almost 31,000 to 189,308. Now, this is in proportion terms, it was about 4% of the population of the working age population in 2011 and 2016, and it's now about 5%. So that is a fairly significant increase. Another population that has grown is the people aged 15 plus who are now in work. So there's an additional 313,656 in that group. So that's obviously quite a big increase in absolute terms. It is also an increase in percentage terms. That is up to 56% from 53% of people aged 15 plus. And again, it's interesting to look at how those 313,000 are distributed around the country. So this map shows for every 100 of those additional workers, how many of them are in each county. So 27% of them are in County Dublin. And looking at just 4 counties, Dublin, Meath, Kildare and Cork, within those 4 counties, you actually have 50% of that 313,000 increase. So that's quite interesting that this growth is very much concentrated in Dublin, the Greater Dublin area, and in Cork. And there is another shift in how we work. It is not just that the number of people in employment has increased. There's been a big change, and that, of course, is the rise of the remote worker. So 32%, almost a third of people who are working are at least some of the time doing so from home, which is an additional 164,512 home workers. Now, that 32% is people who ever work from home. There is also 11% who are mainly or entirely working from home. Now, that mainly or entirely from home has been less than 5% in previous census years. So that is a very big jump. It's a more than doubling. Now, of course, there's some implications of that. One implication of it is that there's a different demand for what you might think of as the lunch break services, not just the actual lunch, but also if you might think of people popping into the bank or popping into post something in the post office over their lunch break. There's now maybe a demand for some of those lunch hour services to be located in more residential areas because those are now also workplace areas. But there is another effect as well, which, as well as being a change in where we spend our working day, it's also a change in how we are using our homes. At one time, there was a very big trend for open plan living, and it was all about knocking down your internal walls and having beautiful, big, bright spaces full of light and room, which is definitely still very nice. But I think for a lot of people now, there's a very strong case to be made for having a closable door that you can shut and keep the chaos out and work behind that door. Even if that means the individual rooms in your house are smaller, I think there's a definite utility in having more subdivisions into smaller, distinct rooms. So I think that will be quite interesting looking into the future, how the lockdowns of early 2020 might actually end up shaping the whole way that Irish homes are designed for use going into the next decade. So the next question is not just how many remote workers are there, but who is working remotely. And interestingly, that varies quite a lot by occupation. So that black bar in the center of the chart there, that is all occupational groups. That's the 32% overall average. But looking at it, there's a great deal of variation from just 3% of administrative and service occupations up to 80% of business, media, and public service. So the vast range is one thing, but you'll notice that generally the occupations with low rates of working from home are the ones where that is not actually very practical. And in occupations where working remotely is feasible, there is actually a much higher than average level of uptake. And that, I think, is interesting because it gives an insight into why people are choosing to work remotely, because presumably, if this is something that a lot of people are doing, it's because people want to do that. At least at some parts of the week. And that reveals something that is important to us. Because as we've said, working from home does demand that you have space to do it. Maybe it means you're sacrificing what would otherwise have been a bedroom or a playroom. Maybe it even means you're buying a large enough home to facilitate having a home space with it. So it's not without a cost. But for a lot of people, it is evidently still a good trade-off to work partly or entirely from home. And I think that shows how much we value not having to spend time commuting. It shows us how strongly we are valuing having free time above a lot of other resources, which in turn, I believe, underlines the importance of convenience in our lives for the consumer today. I think that retailers and other service providers are going to lean into that very strong revealed preference for saving time and saving travel time in particular as a high priority. And I believe that in the future, retailers and services are going to have to really take advantage of the fact that convenience is an extremely important resource for the modern customer, whether that's a function of where they're located or what they are doing. Back to you, Richard.
That's great. Thank you very much, Charlotte. So what we're going to, just wondering, people might be wondering what's next with the census and the kind of analytics that we're doing. So as I mentioned at the outset, there are thematic profiles being released monthly until the end of the year, with the timetable earlier in the presentation, but you can also access that along with all the data used in this presentation. Actually, the CSO are excellent at publishing the data openly and in a usable formats. And that's available on cso.ie. I mentioned that the small area population statistics are key. They're an analytical keystone for pretty much everything that certainly we in Gamma do, because of the granularity of the data is excellent. And that will require significant work to enable time series analysis. There's also going to be additional census data products coming out of above and beyond what's in the timetable. At least we're expecting to see a refresh of the workplace zones data sets issued by the CSO after the 2016 census. This is sort of defining areas based on commute patterns. and a 1 kilometer grid square product, which will have some variables available, which in some parts of the country will actually be at finer resolution in small areas. It will just be typically headcount. But we find that the census data is a key input for, in our organization, a huge amount of the models that Charlotte and myself work on. Everything from energy efficiencies to functional area definitions. And also it allows some cross-border analysis. What's interesting is that the UK had a census around about the same time as Ireland did. They didn't postpone their census in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So they ran theirs as normal in 2021. Scotland, like Ireland, postponed theirs until 2022. So we will be able to construct a set of models that cover all territories in the British and Irish Islands, probably by the middle of 2024. And then what we do with that, we do all sorts of store optimization, store network optimization with extended demographics. We have full range of historical and current POI data, which we build and maintain in-house, and use that to enrich the census data, or inform the census data, or be informed by the census data. And obviously there's a huge amount of history with that. We also kind of incorporate customer spend data and deliver spatial retail models on off-the-shelf or cloud-hosted solutions. And we do build a wide range of custom solutions for everybody from the telecom sector, logistics, and financial institutions who have ESG reporting requirements and so on. And to that end, myself and Charlotte effectively work for what we're calling Gamma Location Labs, which is our R&D and consulting arm of the vast Gamma empire. If you do want to contact us, obviously there's still time for people to feed questions in there. I've seen there's a few in there that we'll get to now. But again, we're contactable. You can see the websites and email addresses there if you do want to get in touch. So with that, there's about 3 or 4 questions here that I'm going to get to. And again, if you do have any additional ones, please feel free to type them into the questions tab there. There was a query about whether this presentation is being recorded, and indeed it is. So this will be available on our website in the coming weeks. We will be running more of these webinars over the summer as additional data is released, and we'll be writing blog posts and so on. So again, keep an eye on the website and our social media for that. There was one question there was on, are there any headline figures on nationality? And we didn't analyze that for today. Certainly we can do if there's interest. There will be future data released on that at a more granular level that we can come back to with us. But the headline really number there is that 20% of the people who are currently living in Ireland were born elsewhere, which is a 2% increase from 2016. And if you even look at where those people are working, those of them that are in the labour force, 30% of the workforce in the information and communication sector, and also in the accommodation and food service sectors. So those 2 sectors, more than 30% of the workforce was born outside of Ireland. You can compare that to public administration and defence, 4%, or agriculture, forestry and fishing, which is 5%. So these people who are enriching our society by coming here tend to be focused in particular occupational sectors. There was another question about employment by sector. Again, we're going to be looking at that. Charlotte did flash it for a graph there about working from home across these different sectors. But in terms of overall employment, we will look at that in more detail. But we did note, for example, that the construction sector has added about 32,000 people since the last census. It's actually risen from a low of 87,000 in 2011 to 102,000, so an increase of about 19,000. in between 2011 and 2016, and then a much bigger increase from 102 to 134 between 2016 and 2022. But that is still a very long way off the 215,000 or so people that were employed in construction at the height of the Celtic Tiger in 2016. We should be able to make a PDF copy of this presentation available. I think we'll be putting it on the website in some form. So yeah, we can issue that for the person who's asking that question. And finally, yeah, there was this question on the small area data. Why does this take time? Because they thought they were fixed. The small area boundaries are fixed. The small area boundaries are not fixed as such, because as they have typically 100 households in each small area. So as even a large apartment complex is built, this may require additional small areas to be generated. The electoral divisions, or the EDs, which are bigger, they have about 1,000 people in or so. Those tend not to change. We're hopeful that we'll be able to do time series level data analysis with the EDs without having to do any additional work. But for the small areas, we will require additional work. There's also a question on the population is aging. Do you see it decreasing over time, or will net migration continue to compensate for this? That's an interesting question. And then the CSO themselves do publish a range of forward-looking models for the Irish population. But the likelihood is that even with net migration continuing, with current trends, the population is going to continue to age. But at some point, yes, the continuing influx of people into the country, whether they are returned immigrants or new Irish, will have a compensatory effect. But I don't think it's going to be sufficient to halt the overall rise in population age. That said, I'm speculating on that count at this point. Obviously, the future is uncertain. Okay, I think we've probably got to all the questions. I don't think there's anything else you'd like to add there, Charlotte.
No, not at all.
Happy enough. Okay, excellent. Well, then we'll give everybody back 20 minutes of your day. So have a cup of coffee on us. Thanks very much for attending. And again, you can reach out at the contact details there if you need to get in touch with us about anything on this. And we will see you at the next webinar. The date to be confirmed, but there will be a number of them over the summer. So thank you all very much for your attendance.